The ballroom glowed with soft gold light, the kind meant to make everyone look important. Crystal glasses clinked, low music floated through the air, and conversations overlapped like quiet waves. People in fine suits and expensive dresses moved slowly, careful not to spill anything that might stain their image. This charity event had been talked about for weeks, not because of the cause, but because of who would be seen there. Among the servers was a young waitress who had started working at the hotel only a few months earlier. She wore the standard uniform, neatly pressed, and kept her hair tied back. She moved carefully, holding a silver tray with both hands, reminding herself to breathe and stay calm. Big events like this always made her nervous. One mistake could cost her the job, and she could not afford that. She had learned quickly that these rooms had rules that were never written down. Smile, but not too much. Speak softly. Never stand out. Most of all, never upset the guests. Across the room stood a rich socialite known for her sharp tone and louder presence. People noticed her the moment she walked in. Her dress shimmered under the lights, and her jewelry caught every glance. She laughed often, but there was something cold behind it. Staff members whispered her name with caution. They knew her reputation well. She expected perfection and had little patience for anything less. As the night went on, drinks were ordered faster, and the room grew more crowded. The waitress was asked to cover an extra section after another server felt unwell. Her feet already ached, but she nodded without complaint. She reminded herself that this was just one night. While weaving between guests, someone bumped her elbow from behind. The tray tilted for a second, and a splash of dark liquid landed on the edge of the socialite's dress. It was not much, just a small stain, but it was enough. The room seemed to freeze. The waitress felt her heart drop before the glass even stopped shaking. She lowered the tray quickly and spoke at once. Her voice was soft but clear. She apologized again and again, offering napkins and promising to call for help. The socialite stared at the stain as if it were an insult carved into stone. Her face tightened, and the smile she had worn moments earlier vanished. Nearby conversations slowed as people sensed something coming. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The socialite snapped. Her voice cut through the room, sharp and loud. The waitress tried to explain, her hands shaking as she reached for napkins. She said it was an accident. She said she was sorry. She said she would fix it, but the words did not matter. The socialite stepped closer, ignoring the staff member approaching from behind. She began speaking faster, louder, listing the cost of the dress, the importance of the night, the embarrassment she felt. Heads turned. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others watched with interest, as if this were part of the evening's entertainment. Then, in a sudden movement, the socialite grabbed the front of the waitress's uniform, pulling it hard in anger. There was a sharp sound as a seam tore slightly under the force. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The waitress froze. She did not scream. She did not pull back. Her face went pale, and her eyes filled, but she stayed silent. A manager rushed forward, placing himself between them. He spoke quickly, trying to calm the situation, apologizing on behalf of the hotel. Another staff member guided the waitress gently away, covering her with a jacket. The socialite waved them off, still furious, saying she had every right to be angry. She straightened her dress and turned back to her group, as if nothing important had happened. In a quiet hallway away from the noise, the waitress leaned against the wall, breathing slowly. Her hands trembled, but she pressed them together until they steadied. A coworker asked if she was okay. She nodded, even though her throat felt tight. She did not cry. Not there. The manager apologized to her again and again, saying the hotel would handle it. She listened politely, though her mind felt far away. She knew how these things usually ended. The guest would leave, the night would go on, and she would be told to be more careful next time. She stepped into the staff room to adjust her uniform. The tear was small but noticeable. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and took out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed a short message. Nothing dramatic. Just a few simple words explaining that something had happened and that she would be late coming home. She put the phone away and took a deep breath. Back in the ballroom, the music grew louder again. Laughter returned. Glasses were refilled. The moment passed for most people, already becoming a story they would tell later with softened edges. But for the waitress, the night had changed. She returned to work, keeping her head down, avoiding eye contact. Some guests smiled kindly at her. Others pretended not to notice her at all. The socialite did not look in her direction again. As the hours passed, the event moved toward its end. Speeches were made about generosity and kindness. Applause filled the room. The words sounded hollow to the waitress as she stood near the wall, holding an empty tray. When the final guests began to leave, staff members started cleaning quietly. The socialite exited with her group, laughing once more, her earlier anger already forgotten. The waitress clocked out later than usual. She walked out the back entrance into the cool night air. The city lights felt distant and unreal. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself and waited. A dark car pulled up to the curb after a few minutes. A man stepped out, dressed simply, his face calm but concerned. He looked at her carefully, as if making sure she was truly there. She smiled faintly when she saw him. They did not speak much as she got into the car. She only said she was tired. He nodded and started the engine. As they drove away, the hotel lights faded behind them, still glowing with wealth and celebration. Inside the car, the silence felt safe. The night that had begun as just another shift had become something else entirely. Though no one at the gala yet understood how far its effects would reach, the next morning, the young waitress woke up with a mix of exhaustion and relief. The night had been long, and her mind kept replaying the incident. She could still feel the weight of the socialite's anger, the sudden pull on her uniform, the shocked gasps from the guests. But now, in the quiet of her small apartment, it all seemed almost unreal. She had survived it. She had stayed calm when many would have panicked. That thought gave her a little strength. Even so, she could not ignore the small tear in her uniform. It was a reminder that what had happened was real. She carefully mended it with a needle and thread, each stitch slow and deliberate. She wanted it to be perfect, not just for her job, but for herself. It was strange, she thought, how a tiny piece of fabric could carry so much memory and tension. When the work was done, she put the uniform aside. She knew she could wear it again, but the memory it carried would remain with her longer. By mid-morning, the hotel staff was buzzing with quiet activity. Managers and supervisors were already discussing the previous night, trying to piece together what had happened. Some staff members had shared their observations. Others had been too busy serving to notice the full incident. Whispers moved through the hallways like a slow, cautious current. Some were curious, some judgmental, and some sympathetic. But no one had the full picture. No one, that is, except those who had been directly involved. The waitress arrived at the hotel to start her next shift. She felt a strange mix of nerves and resolve as she walked through the familiar doors. She knew that some staff members were already talking about her, wondering how she had handled the socialite's anger. Some were impressed by her calmness. Others feared what might happen next. She gave polite nods as she passed colleagues, keeping her head down. She did not need to relive the event, at least not yet. In the staff room, she found a few familiar faces. A coworker approached, speaking quietly so only she could hear. "Are you okay?" "That was intense last night," the coworker said, looking concerned. The waitress smiled faintly and nodded. "I'm fine," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her hands twitched slightly as she adjusted her apron. "It was an accident. I just did my best." Her words were simple, but there was a quiet strength behind them. Despite her composure, she could sense tension in the air. The managers had gathered for a brief meeting, and it was clear they were worried about potential complaints or publicity. Some of the higher-ups were concerned that the socialite might demand compensation or even threaten legal action. Others were worried about the staff's morale. The young waitress, however, remained silent. She had no intention of making the situation bigger than it already was. She had done nothing wrong. Later that morning, the hotel's manager came to speak with her privately. His expression was serious, but not unkind. "We're very sorry about what happened last night," he began. "It should never have escalated the way it did. You handled yourself very well." The waitress felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone was recognizing her courage. She nodded politely. "Thank you," she said softly. "I just tried to stay calm." The manager continued, "We want to make sure you feel safe and supported. We're going to review the situation and make sure nothing like this happens again. You're a valued member of our team." The words felt reassuring, though she knew that the socialite's influence could still complicate matters. Still, it was comforting to know that the hotel recognized her worth and was willing to protect her. Meanwhile, word of the incident had begun to spread quietly among some of the regular guests and staff. People who had attended the gala whispered about the socialite's temper, some expressing disbelief, others offering sympathy to the young waitress. The story was growing, but it remained controlled, mostly circulating behind closed doors. Nobody wanted to cause a scandal, but everyone noticed the tension and the unusual quietness of the room the next morning. Despite the attention, the waitress kept her routine. She moved carefully between tables, refilling drinks, clearing dishes, and offering polite smiles. She spoke to guests as always, calm and professional, but there was a quiet confidence in her demeanor, now that had not been there before. She had faced a challenge, and she had survived. That experience, though painful, had strengthened her in a subtle way. As the day went on, she received a brief message on her phone. It was simple, just a few words from a number she recognized, but rarely heard from. She looked at the screen, curiosity and surprise mixing in her chest. The message read, "Are you okay?" It was from her husband. He did not usually check in on her during work hours. Something about the timing felt different, almost as if he had already heard whispers of the incident. She quickly typed back, "I'm fine. It was just a rough night." Within moments, another message appeared. "Come to me after your shift. Don't worry about anything else." There was no anger, no demands, just calm concern. She felt a warmth in her chest. Despite the chaos of the previous night, she knew that she had someone quietly supporting her, someone who would make sure she was safe without creating more noise. That thought made the day feel a little less heavy. Later, during a brief break, she stepped outside for fresh air. The sun was bright, the city streets alive with movement and noise, but she felt a bubble of calm around her. She reflected on what had happened and realized something important. Her reaction, her composure, and her quiet strength had made a difference. The socialite had tried to humiliate her, but she had not let it succeed. She had preserved her dignity, and in that moment, it felt empowering. Back inside the hotel, the managers were still discussing the gala, reviewing footage, and talking to witnesses. They wanted to understand every detail and make sure there would be no repeat incidents. The young waitress's professionalism was being praised, quietly but firmly. Some staff members had begun to look at her differently, with respect rather than pity. She noticed this, though she did not let it affect her actions. She knew that respect must be earned, not demanded. As the day moved forward, the hotel received a phone call from someone connected to the Socialite. They asked for details, trying to understand exactly what had happened. The staff responded carefully, providing only factual information. There was no accusation, no blame, just a clear description of events. The young waitress was not involved in these discussions. She had no intention of participating in them. She had done her job, and now she would let others handle the fallout. When her shift finally ended, the young waitress felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She packed her things slowly, taking a moment to straighten her uniform and smooth her hair. Her coworkers wished her well, offering small smiles and quiet words of encouragement. She appreciated it, though she did not dwell on it. She wanted to leave the hotel behind for the day and step into a space where she could breathe freely. Outside, she saw the familiar car waiting for her, the one driven by her husband. He opened the door, his calm presence a comfort after the tension of the day. She stepped inside, letting the stress of the hotel melt away. He did not ask many questions, simply offering quiet support and understanding. The car moved through the city streets, the sounds of traffic and life around them, but inside the vehicle, there was peace. She leaned back in her seat, thinking about the events of the night before and the day that followed. It had been difficult, humbling, and stressful, but she had survived. She had remained calm, handled herself with dignity, and found quiet support from someone who cared for her deeply. That combination of personal strength and external support felt powerful in a way she had never experienced before. As they drove, her husband finally spoke, his voice gentle and steady. "You did well," he said simply. "I know it wasn't easy, but you handled it with grace." She nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement, though she did not feel it was extraordinary. She had only done what she could in the moment, but hearing it aloud made her feel seen in a way she rarely did at work. By the time they reached home, the city had begun to settle into evening. The young waitress stepped out of the car, feeling a quiet sense of relief. She knew the hotel would continue to handle the situation carefully, and she trusted that her husband's quiet influence would keep her safe if anything escalated. For now, she could rest, recover, and prepare herself for whatever the future might bring. She walked inside, the familiar surroundings of her home offering comfort. Her thoughts drifted to the small tear in her uniform, the sharp words, the stares, and the gasps. Even now, it felt surreal. But as she unpacked her bag and set her things down, she realized that one small night had changed her in subtle ways. She had seen how quickly tension could escalate, how fragile appearances could be, and how important it was to stay calm under pressure. Later that evening, she sat quietly, reflecting on the lessons she had learned. She thought about patience, resilience, and dignity. She thought about the people who had watched, and the ones who had whispered, judging or sympathizing. And she thought about the quiet support that had made everything bearable. She realized that sometimes strength was not about confrontation or loud action, but about remaining steady, preserving one's integrity, and trusting that justice, in its own quiet way, would follow. By the time she went to bed, exhaustion pulled at her. Her mind still replayed the night, but not with fear this time. There was a sense of resolution, a sense of calm after the storm. She understood that life in a place where wealth and power often overshadowed kindness could be unpredictable. But she also knew that she had learned something important about herself. She had the ability to remain composed, to protect her dignity, and to rely on those who truly cared for her. The next morning would bring more challenges. But for now, the young waitress allowed herself to rest. The incident had left its mark, but it had also shown her that she could handle more than she had ever imagined. She had survived, And that survival felt like a small victory in a world that often demanded perfection from the powerless. She drifted to sleep with a quiet sense of relief, knowing that the coming days would continue to test her, but also knowing that she had already proven something vital. She was stronger than anyone could make her feel, and her dignity could not be taken by anger or cruelty. The memory of the socialite's outburst would remain, but so would her calm, quiet strength. The morning after the gala, the hotel was quieter than usual. Staff moved carefully, glancing at one another with a mix of curiosity and caution. The incident from the night before had not been forgotten, but it was already taking on the strange qualities of a story told in fragments. Some details were accurate, others exaggerated slightly. The young waitress tried not to think about it, focusing on her tasks as she prepared for another busy day. She knew that in a place like this, stories could spread quickly, and the way they were told could shape the way people thought about her. She moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, checking trays, refilling drinks, and coordinating with her coworkers. Everyone seemed to be watching her closely, though no one said anything. Some offered quiet smiles, others seemed hesitant. She kept her head down, concentrating on her work. She did not need approval, but she appreciated the small gestures of support got around mid-morning. A car pulled up quietly to the hotel entrance. Unlike the fancy vehicles that usually arrived with gala guests, this car was simple and understated. The man who stepped out wore plain clothes and carried himself with a calm, steady presence. He did not rush. He did not look around for attention. He simply walked through the doors, polite to the staff, but clearly someone they did not recognize. The hotel manager noticed him immediately. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet authority that demanded attention without force. The manager approached politely, ready to assist. "Can I help you?" he asked, offering a professional smile. The man simply nodded and asked to speak with the staff member who had been involved in the incident the previous night. The manager felt a slight tightening in his chest. He knew the story had grown in whispers, but he did not recognize the man's name or his connection. He led the way discreetly, trying not to alarm the other staff. When the young waitress saw him, she felt a mix of surprise and calm recognition. She knew who he was, but she had rarely seen him in person. His presence brought a sense of security, a reminder that she was not alone in dealing with what had happened. She greeted him quietly, her voice calm but warm. He listened as she recounted the events of the previous night. She spoke honestly, without exaggeration or complaint, describing the socialite's anger, the spill, the tear in her uniform, and the way she had handled herself. He nodded, asking a few gentle questions for clarification. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand an explanation from anyone else. He simply listened, carefully and thoughtfully. After she finished, he spoke. His words were calm, measured, and confident. "You did exactly the right thing," he said. "You stayed calm, kept your dignity, and handled a difficult situation without making it worse. That matters more than you realize." The young waitress felt a wave of relief. It was one thing to hear compliments from coworkers or managers. It was another to hear it from someone who had influence, someone whose opinion carried weight in ways most people could not imagine. He then turned his attention to the manager and other staff present. He spoke quietly but firmly, explaining that he wanted the incident reviewed carefully. He emphasized that no one should feel unsafe, that staff should be respected, and that consequences for inappropriate behavior must be fair and just. His calm authority shifted the energy in the room. No one argued. No one dismissed him. They listened. The young waitress watched the scene unfold, her respect for him growing. She realized that true influence was not about making a scene, showing off wealth, or intimidating others. It was about quiet authority, calm judgment, and the ability to act decisively without creating chaos. She felt a sense of gratitude that she could not fully express in words. After the meeting, he walked with her to a quiet hallway, away from the other staff. "I wanted to come myself," he said softly. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." She nodded, feeling a warmth she had not felt in weeks. His presence was a reminder that she was valued not just for her work, but for who she was as a person. For the rest of the day, the hotel moved carefully around the incident. Managers reviewed security footage, spoke to witnesses, and made notes. Staff whispered quietly to one another, sharing observations and offering support. The socialite had left the premises hours ago, unaware that her actions were being reviewed more closely than she could imagine. The young waitress continued her work, moving through the rooms with grace and focus. She noticed small changes in how people interacted with her. Some guests were polite in ways they had not been before. Some staff members looked at her with new respect, acknowledging the way she had handled herself. It was not a dramatic shift, but it was noticeable. She felt a sense of quiet pride, though she did not allow it to distract her from her responsibilities. Later in the afternoon, the manager called her into his office again. "We want to make sure you have everything you need," he said. "We've offered to cover any damages and provide support. You should not have to worry about this." She appreciated the gesture, but shook her head. "I'm fine," she said. "I don't need anything. I just want to do my job well." Her words were simple, but they carried strength and dignity. As she left the office, she noticed a few staff members whispering quietly. They seemed curious but respectful. She smiled faintly and continued on her way. She knew that gossip would always exist, but it could not touch her if she stayed calm and focused. By evening, the young waitress was preparing to leave. She had finished her shift and was ready to step out into the cool night air. She felt the weight of the day's events, but also a sense of calm that had been missing the night before. She knew that the incident at the gala had changed things, but it had not broken her. She was still strong, still composed, still herself. Outside, the car she had come to recognize was waiting. The man stepped out and opened the door for her. She climbed in, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. They drove through the city streets, quiet and steady, without the noise of the hotel or the gala pressing down on her. During the ride, they spoke little. Words were not necessary. His presence alone provided comfort. She leaned back in her seat, allowing herself to relax for the first time in hours. The city lights passed by, blurry and bright, but she felt grounded. She felt safe. After a while, he finally spoke. "You handled yourself well," he said. "I know it was difficult. I just want you to remember that your dignity and calm matter more than anyone's anger or status." She nodded, understanding fully. His words reinforced what she already knew. She had faced a challenge, and she had faced it with grace. When they reached home, the young waitress stepped out of the car and took a deep breath. The familiar surroundings of her apartment offered comfort and a sense of normalcy. She unpacked her bag slowly, reflecting on the day. The incident at the gala felt distant now, though the lessons it brought were still fresh. She had seen the power of calm authority, the importance of staying composed, and the quiet strength that comes from dignity. Later that evening, she sat quietly by the window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the people who had watched, who had whispered, who had judged. She thought about the man who had come quietly to support her, whose presence had changed the course of the aftermath. She realized that strength was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, and profoundly impactful. She reflected on the day and realized that she had learned something important about trust. Trust was not about relying on luck or hoping others would notice your efforts. It was about understanding who truly had your back, who would act with integrity, and who would offer support without seeking attention or reward. She felt fortunate to know that she was not alone, that she had someone watching over her quietly, ensuring she was safe and respected. The night passed quietly, and the young waitress allowed herself to rest. She understood that challenges would continue to come, that life in a world where wealth and power could dominate behavior would never be simple. But she also knew that she had proven something vital. She could remain composed under pressure, protect her dignity, and trust in those who truly cared for her as she drifted to sleep. She thought about the future. She did not know what the next gala or event might bring. She did not know if the socialite would return or if whispers about her would continue. But she felt a quiet confidence. She had faced anger and humiliation, yet she had emerged steady and strong. She understood now that true strength was not measured by the absence of challenges, but by the ability to remain composed and dignified when they arose. The next morning would bring a new day, new tasks, and perhaps new challenges. But for now, the young waitress allowed herself to enjoy the calm, the quiet support, and the reassurance that she was valued and respected. She knew that the world could be unpredictable, but she also knew that she had already learned something essential: the combination of personal strength, dignity, and quiet support was more powerful than anger, status, or intimidation. And so, as the city slept and the lights of the skyline flickered softly, she rested, ready to face whatever would come next, knowing that she was not alone and that her strength could carry her through anything. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the hotel, casting long, warm streaks across the polished floors. Staff were moving quickly, preparing for the day, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The gala from the night before had left a mark. Conversations were quieter, more cautious. People glanced at one another, aware that something important had happened, even if they didn't know all the details. The young waitress arrived early, as usual. She wore her uniform neatly, though the small tears she had mended days before still tugged at the memory of that night. She moved through the corridors with practiced care, greeting colleagues politely. Though the initial shock of the socialite's anger had faded, the weight of the incident lingered. She could feel it in the way some staff watched her, and in the quiet tension around the manager's office. By mid-morning, the hotel had received a call that changed the mood further. It was a representative connected to the socialite, asking for a detailed account of the incident. The staff answered carefully, sticking to facts. There was no accusation, no blame, only a clear description of events. The socialite wanted to understand exactly what had happened, but she had no idea that the quiet investigation unfolding was about to have serious consequences. The young waitress continued her work, focusing on each task with deliberate care. She moved through the grand ballroom, carrying trays and refilling drinks, all while keeping a calm smile. The staff whispered quietly among themselves, some offering supportive nods, others quietly expressing curiosity. But she did not let it distract her. She knew her composure was her strength. Meanwhile, the man who had quietly supported her after the gala took action behind the scenes. Using his influence, he reached out to the hotel management and ensured that everything was being documented carefully. He wanted to protect the staff, not make a spectacle. His approach was calm and deliberate, a reminder that real power often worked quietly. The hotel managers, who had initially been nervous about possible fallout, began to feel a sense of confidence. They knew that this situation, handled correctly, would not escalate beyond control. Later in the day, the young waitress noticed a subtle change in the way some guests looked at her. A few approached her to thank her for her professionalism the night before, speaking in soft, respectful tones. She smiled and nodded, feeling a quiet sense of acknowledgement. For the first time, she felt that her efforts and composure were being noticed in a positive way, rather than as a response to embarrassment or error. The socialite, unaware of the actions being taken, went about her day as usual. She continued to attend high-profile events, confident that her status would shield her from any consequences. Yet behind closed doors, subtle ripples were beginning to affect her. Sponsors, event organizers, and social circles started asking questions, not about the gala itself, but about the incident and the way it had been handled. A few began to reconsider invitations, partnerships, and public appearances. The socialite, who had always relied on appearances and charm, was starting to feel the first hints of pressure. In the hotel, the young waitress remained focused on her routine. She knew that gossip and speculation were inevitable, but she refused to be distracted. She had learned from the previous night that maintaining her calm, dignity, and professionalism mattered far more than reacting to anger or whispers. Every tray she carried, every polite smile she gave, reinforced the strength she had discovered within herself. By late afternoon, the hotel manager called a private meeting with several key staff members. The topic was clear: how to handle the aftermath of the gala responsibly and fairly. The young waitress was invited, not as a witness to gossip, but as someone whose perspective mattered. She listened carefully as managers discussed documentation, communication with guests, and steps to ensure staff safety and respect. She contributed quietly, offering simple, thoughtful suggestions. Her voice was calm but firm, and her ideas were respected. During this meeting, it became clear that the socialite's behavior had more consequences than anyone had anticipated. Contracts and sponsorships linked to the gala were being reviewed. Event organizers began to weigh the socialite's reputation against the risk of controversy. The young waitress had become a quiet but central figure in this chain of events, not because she sought attention, but because her actions had highlighted a contrast between dignity and entitlement. As the day progressed, she noticed that even some of the staff, who had initially been cautious around her, now offered subtle support. A few stopped by with small gestures, a kind word, a shared smile, a quiet acknowledgement of how well she had handled herself. She appreciated it, but she did not rely on it. She understood that strength came from within, and while support from others was valuable, her own composure was what carried her through challenges. Back at the hotel, the quiet but powerful influence of her husband began to show effects in more concrete ways. Without making any public statements, he contacted several decision-makers connected to the socialite, ensuring that fairness and accountability were observed. This was not about revenge. It was about making sure that respect and professional boundaries were maintained. He acted with calm authority, a reminder that true influence often worked behind the scenes, far from public view. Meanwhile, the young waitress completed her shift, feeling both exhaustion and a growing sense of accomplishment. She had faced public anger, witnessed judgmental whispers, and navigated a complex situation without losing her composure. Every action she took that day, however small, reinforced her confidence. She had discovered a quiet strength that could withstand pressure, embarrassment, and uncertainty. As evening approached, she prepared to leave. The hotel had become unusually quiet, a sharp contrast to the energy of the gala. She walked through the hallways slowly, noticing the subtle changes: managers talking quietly, staff offering small nods, and even some guests expressing polite acknowledgement of her professionalism. These changes were small, but they mattered. They showed that dignity and calm could influence people in ways that anger and entitlement never could. Outside, the car was waiting, as it had been since the day after the gala. She stepped in and felt the familiar sense of calm wash over her. The driver, calm and steady, did not speak much, but his presence alone provided reassurance. She leaned back, letting the city's lights pass by as she reflected on the day. Her thoughts drifted to the socialite, unaware of the ripple effects starting to form. She felt no bitterness, only a quiet understanding. Actions have consequences, even when people believe their status shields them. She had seen the first signs of accountability and fairness, and she knew that patience, calm, and integrity often carried far more weight than anger or power. As they drove through the quiet streets, she felt a growing sense of confidence. She had faced challenges, navigated them with dignity, and seen the subtle ways in which justice and accountability began to emerge. Her husband spoke softly, reminding her that she had handled herself well and that she had nothing to fear. She nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. His calm support was a shield she could rely on, but it also reminded her that strength was often quiet, steady, and deliberate. By the time they reached home, the night was settling over the city. The young waitress stepped out of the car, feeling a mixture of relief and accomplishment. She reflected on the events that had unfolded, the gala, the socialite's anger, the quiet support she had received, and the unfolding consequences of the socialite's actions. She understood now that strength was measured not by confrontation or shouting, but by composure, patience, and quiet resilience. She went inside her apartment, letting the familiar surroundings provide comfort. She unpacked her bag slowly, setting things in place. She thought about the lessons she had learned, how to remain calm under pressure, how to protect her dignity, and how to trust in quiet, steady support from those who cared for her. These lessons felt profound, more valuable than any praise or recognition she had ever received. Later, she sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker softly. She reflected on the contrast between the socialite's anger and her own composure, and how one small person, acting with calm and dignity, could influence events in ways that power alone could not. She realized that life often placed challenges in front of people, but it was the response to those challenges that revealed true character. The young waitress understood that the coming days might bring more challenges. The socialite could return, rumors could spread, and people's opinions could shift. But she faced it ready. She had faced public anger, preserved her dignity, and experienced quiet, unwavering support. She knew now that she could navigate difficult situations with calm and clarity, and that her own integrity was the most powerful tool she possessed. As the night deepened, she allowed herself to rest, reflecting on the small but meaningful victories of the day. She had survived an intense situation, witnessed accountability in action, and learned the value of patience, composure, and quiet support. These lessons, she knew, would guide her in the days ahead. She drifted to sleep with a sense of calm and quiet pride. The city outside was alive with activity, but she felt grounded, ready to face whatever challenges might come. The gala incident had tested her, but she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of the power of dignity and calm. Even as she slept, the ripple effects of the gala continued. The socialite's reputation was quietly being questioned in circles she had not expected. Sponsors, event organizers, and influential figures were reassessing their associations, considering the importance of respect and professionalism over status and entitlement. The young waitress, who had remained calm and composed throughout, had become an unexpected symbol of quiet strength. By the time morning arrived, she was ready to face the world again. She knew that life would continue to test her, but she had learned a powerful truth. Maintaining dignity, composure, and quiet strength could shift events in ways that anger and entitlement never could. She had faced a difficult situation, relied on steady support, and emerged with her confidence intact. That knowledge gave her a sense of empowerment she had never known before. And so, as the city awakened, the young waitress prepared to step into another day, ready to continue her work with the calm, quiet confidence that had carried her through the trials of the gala. She understood now that strength was not about reacting to anger or intimidation, but about preserving dignity, trusting in support, and acting with integrity. It was a lesson that would stay with her for the rest of her life, quietly shaping her choices and her actions. No matter what challenges lay ahead, the morning air was crisp and quiet as the young waitress stepped out of her apartment. The city was slowly waking up, cars humming, people walking briskly, and shopkeepers opening their stores. She felt a sense of readiness she had not felt before. The events of the past few days, the gala, the socialite's outburst, the quiet support from her husband, and the subtle ripple effects on the hotel staff had changed her. She had faced anger, embarrassment, and tension, and yet here she was, calm, composed, and more confident than ever. At the hotel, the staff were preparing for another busy day. There was still a buzz about the gala incident, but it had shifted from curiosity to respect. Managers spoke quietly about policies and procedures, ensuring that all staff felt safe and supported. Some colleagues smiled at her, offering gestures of solidarity that were small but meaningful. She acknowledged them with polite nods, feeling quietly proud that her composure had earned respect rather than pity. She moved through the hotel with ease, carrying trays, clearing tables, and assisting guests. Every action she took was deliberate and professional. Even small tasks, like refilling a glass or arranging silverware, carried a sense of purpose. She realized that dignity was not just about facing major challenges. It was also about the way one conducted themselves in everyday life. She had learned that small, consistent acts of professionalism could be just as powerful as standing firm in a moment of confrontation. Mid-morning, the hotel manager approached her again. His tone was warm, but there was a seriousness to his words. "We've received confirmation that the socialite will be held accountable for her behavior," he said quietly. "There are consequences, and the company has ensured that staff are protected. You don't have to worry about anything." She felt a surge of relief. It was one thing to face anger directly, but it was another to see that the systems in place could protect fairness and respect. She nodded, feeling grateful but composed. As the day went on, she noticed a subtle shift in how guests interacted with her. Some approached with curiosity, asking polite questions about the gala, but their tone was respectful rather than judgmental. Others offered quiet compliments, noting how calm and professional she had remained under pressure. She smiled politely, answering simply and honestly. She had learned that humility and sincerity were more powerful than boasting or defensiveness. Meanwhile, the socialite's influence quietly began to wane. Invitations she had taken for granted were being reconsidered. Event organizers and sponsors were discussing her behavior, weighing the impact of her temper and entitlement against the need for professionalism and accountability. Although she remained unaware, the young waitress had already indirectly influenced this shift. Her calm composure had set a standard, showing that dignity and professionalism mattered more than wealth or status. By afternoon, the young waitress was moving between tables, serving drinks, clearing dishes, and maintaining her usual cheerful demeanor. She noticed a few colleagues quietly observing her, perhaps looking to learn from her example. She continued her work without pause, understanding that her actions, even in small ways, could set an example for others. She felt a quiet sense of responsibility, knowing that maintaining her composure could have ripple effects beyond her own experience. During a brief break, she received a message from her husband. It was simple. "I'm proud of you. You've handled everything with grace." She smiled as she read it, feeling warmth and reassurance. His support had been quiet but steady throughout this entire ordeal, and it reminded her that strength did not always have to be loud. Sometimes it was the calm presence of someone who cared that mattered most. Later, the hotel manager called another meeting, this time to discuss long-term measures to prevent similar incidents. Policies around guest behavior, staff safety, and reporting procedures were being reviewed. The young waitress attended, not as a passive participant, but as someone whose perspective was valued. She spoke calmly, suggesting ways to make staff feel more secure and confident. Her ideas were simple but thoughtful, and the managers listened attentively. By the end of the day, she had finished her shift and was preparing to leave. She walked through the hotel corridors slowly, reflecting on everything that had happened. The incident with the socialite had been intense and stressful, but it had also taught her valuable lessons about resilience, dignity, and the power of calm. She realized that true strength was not about dominating others or reacting with anger. It was about remaining composed, thoughtful, and patient, even when faced with challenges. Outside, the familiar car awaited. She stepped inside, feeling a wave of relief. The city lights flickered as they drove through the streets, but she felt a sense of peace. Her husband's quiet presence beside her was comforting, a reminder that she did not face the world alone. She leaned back in her seat, allowing herself to relax after weeks of tension and uncertainty. During the ride, he spoke softly. "You've done more than you realize. You've shown strength in a way that matters. People will remember it, and it will make a difference." She nodded, appreciating his words, but she knew it was not about recognition. She had learned that integrity, composure, and quiet resilience were their own reward. When they arrived home, the young waitress stepped out, feeling the comfort of familiar surroundings. She unpacked her bag and settled into her apartment, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The gala, the socialite's anger, the quiet support she had received, and the subtle ripple effects on the hotel staff had all contributed to her growth. She realized that life often tested people in unexpected ways, but those tests could reveal hidden strengths and capabilities. Later that evening, she sat by the window, looking out at the city. The streets were alive with activity, but she felt grounded and calm. She thought about the socialite, whose temper and entitlement had caused disruption, and how accountability was quietly beginning to take its course. She felt no anger or resentment, only a quiet understanding that actions have consequences, and that dignity and patience often outlast impulsive behavior. Over the next few days, she noticed continued changes at work. Staff interactions were more respectful, and managers emphasized fairness and support for employees. Guests continued to comment positively on her professionalism, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence she had developed. She realized that the small choices she made each day, how she responded to stress, how she treated others, how she maintained composure, were just as important as the major challenges she had faced. One afternoon, she received a phone call from the hotel manager. "We've reviewed everything, and the socialite has been formally reprimanded," he said. "Your actions were a key part of understanding what happened. We want to thank you for your composure and honesty." She felt a quiet sense of relief and satisfaction. The situation had reached a resolution without creating unnecessary conflict, and she had remained true to herself throughout. That evening, she and her husband sat together quietly. They spoke little, but the shared sense of understanding and support was powerful. She reflected on how much she had grown in just a few days. She had faced anger, embarrassment, and uncertainty, yet she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own capabilities. She understood now that strength was often quiet and subtle, and that dignity and patience could influence events in ways that anger or status never could. Over time, the socialite's reputation shifted subtly. People began to recognize the importance of behavior, accountability, and respect, rather than status or wealth. The young waitress's calm composure had set an example without her even realizing it. She continued her work at the hotel with renewed confidence, understanding that challenges would come and go, but the principles she had learned would guide her through anything. Months later, the gala incident became a story of quiet lessons rather than scandal. Staff, guests, and even the socialite herself had learned the value of patience, dignity, and professionalism. The young waitress was no longer just a staff member who had faced a difficult moment. She had become a symbol of composure, strength, and resilience. People remembered her actions not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they were thoughtful, steady, and impactful. She continued her routine at the hotel, moving between tables, assisting guests, and maintaining a calm, professional presence. Her confidence was evident, though never boastful. She had learned that true strength was not about being noticed. It was about acting with integrity, treating others with respect, and standing firm in one's values. These lessons shaped not only her work, but her entire approach to life. One quiet evening, she looked out at the city from her apartment window. The lights flickered softly, and the streets below were alive with movement. She reflected on how far she had come, from the chaos of the gala to the quiet respect she now carried in her daily life. She realized that challenges would continue to appear, but she was no longer intimidated by them. She had discovered an inner strength she had never known, and that strength would guide her in every situation. As she prepared for bed, she felt a sense of calm and accomplishment. The gala incident had tested her in ways she had never imagined, but she had remained composed, protected her dignity, and relied on quiet, steady support. She had emerged not only unbroken, but stronger, wiser, and more confident. The lessons she had learned would stay with her forever, shaping her choices, her actions, and her approach to life. Out in the quiet of her apartment, she drifted to sleep with a deep sense of peace. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she had learned that patience, composure, dignity, and quiet resilience were more powerful than anger, status, or intimidation. She had faced a moment of trial, navigated it with grace, and emerged stronger on the other side. And so, the young waitress continued her journey, carrying with her the quiet strength and confidence she had discovered. She understood that true power was not measured by wealth, status, or dramatic displays, but by the ability to remain calm, dignified, and true to oneself, even in the most difficult circumstances. Her story became a reminder that integrity, patience, and quiet resilience are the most enduring qualities a person can possess, shaping lives and influencing the world in subtle but meaningful ways.